sky is starting to pump her wings. She kind of goes out towards the crowd, looks at the crowd, comes back around, is doing these super tight circles above me. I'm kind of walking around in the field, trying to kind of simulate what we normally do, just this time with 100 people watching. And I can see that she's still pumping her wings. She's going up, and I'm looking at my GPS, and I'm checking with the guy, with the judge that has the other GPS on. And I'm just saying, hey, do you have 260? Yeah, you have 260? Okay, I've got 280. Are you at 280? Yeah, you're at 280. Okay, I'm at 290, 295, 299, 301. And I say, throw the pigeons.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Told podcast. And we are now at episode 99, and we are inching that much closer to our next big milestone marker being the century mark. And we have some very cool things in the works for the next few months, so we have a lot of great content lined up, and we're looking forward to bringing it to you all. And thank you all again so very much for continuing to join us on this journey. Can't ever say thank you enough, and we greatly appreciate it. And before we jump into this episode, I'm going to give a quick shout out to one of the newest sponsors of the podcast, being Yaga Crafts. If you're in the market for any high-quality handmade falconry equipment for your falconry birds, I highly suggest hitting up Bobby Yaga. He makes some great stuff. My personal favorites are the anklets that he makes with Marshall's Easy Twist nuts sewn in, and it's very convenient. I've really enjoyed using it the last couple of seasons, so if you're interested in ordering anything from Bobby Yaga, hit him up at Bobby Yaga Goshawk on Instagram, or you can contact him at the email address that will be in the episode description. You won't regret it. He makes some great stuff, and it's all, like I said, really high quality. And what I like the most about him is he continues to improve his designs as well. So, like I said, hit him up. You definitely won't regret it. So, at the Spring Rendezvous Banquet, I was told by our mutual friend Alyssa that Krista would probably be interested in being a guest on the podcast because she had some interesting perspectives and stories to share about different things that she kind of faced coming into the sport. And after talking to her and learning that she had some interest in being a guest on the podcast, I quickly realized that she would probably be a good episode to have, because she did indeed have some very unique perspectives and adversity, I guess you could say, in getting into the sport. So I thought that people might be able to definitely get something out of her story and learn something from it. And there's some other inspiring things too that she had to share, and I think you all will, if nothing else, appreciate, because we all kind of go through different trials and tribulations at times in falconry, and some of her experiences are definitely no exception. So all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to this conversation with Krista Edwards, and I hope you enjoy it. Here we go. It's always fun about 3 beers in, and after
after being awake for who knows how long at this point, 15 hours, 18 hours,
something like that.
Yeah.
And after 3 long days of just nonstop hangouts,
nonstop socializing,
talking, and everything
meeting new
else,
people, remembering names,
which I'm terrible at.
Oh
normally.
no, I'm a teacher and I suck at it.
Yeah. Well, so what grade do you teach?
I teach 9th grade English language arts. A lot of people, when they hear, oh, you're a teacher and you're a falconer, you must be teaching biology or wildlife, and I'm like, no, I teach Shakespeare.
Nice.
Yeah.
My stepmom is a 8th grade English and literature teacher.
Okay,
yeah.
That's where I started, 8th grade.
Yeah.
I finally graduated.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think that she ended up really liking and settling in the middle school realm as compared to dealing with, the high schoolers, which I'm sure you can kind of relate to.
Oh, yeah. High schoolers are neurotic, but I love them.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's kind of one of those things where I'm glad that we managed to sit down and find the time to do this. I always like pushing through, like I was saying earlier, because you never know when you're going to get the chance to be in a situation where you're with certain people again. And I always like making the most of the opportunities whenever, they come. And just push through, have another beer and push through.
Exactly. Here we are until midnight.
Exactly. Yeah. So awesome. Well, so was this your first time being at the archives too, or for the rendezvous? Or?
This is my first time at the rendezvous. I've been to the archives quite a few times though in the past.
Okay.
I've been fortunate enough to make quite a few friends in Idaho, and so during the hawking season, before I had a bird, they would say, "Hey, come on up, let's go," or "Let's go check out Iries," or just whatever's happening. And I'm the first one to drop everything and drive 5 hours to Boise and back.
Yeah. And where did I'm sorry, where'd you say you lived again?
I live in Lehi, Utah.
Lehi. Okay. Yeah, no, I've been through there several times. Salt Lake and Ogden and Logan and visiting
that
friends
I-15
mostly.
corridor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, that's cool. Yeah, I will say that. I mean, just from what I've seen from Utah falconry, like it's funny how most of them end up in Idaho.
Yes, because Utah itself, I hate to admit, does not have a lot of land for longwingers right now. And so a lot of them end up migrating north to Idaho or over to Wyoming to find longwing slips. Yeah,
unless you're flying the micro longwings, and in which case there's still plenty of places in Utah and stuff.
Yeah, you can always find sparrows and starlings.
Sure. Yeah, pretty much any street corner. Or
any parking lot.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's awesome. No, like I said, it's kind of nice meeting other people that have also kind of been well traveled, so to speak. And how have you been able to, with the teacher's schedule, been able to coordinate all these things? Because when we were talking briefly a little while ago, I know you've been kind of here, there, and everywhere. Yeah. So, how have you been able to coordinate that around, your normal schedule?
Yeah, no, of course. As a teacher, we're pretty much in business August until May, at least on the West Coast. That's the usual schedule. And so I am unfortunate enough to have all my days off be in the summer, which is not typical falconry season. But I took advantage of that in just making connections, so I would travel to different countries during the summer to make these connections. And then if there was a cheap flight that popped up that happened to be during fall break or spring break or winter break, I would take advantage of that and just, kids, you're getting a substitute and you're going to survive. And I'm going to have a great time in Ireland or in Spain or, in England, and go and have the chance to meet different falconers overseas. And so I remember specifically one moment when I had just FaceTimed with this amazing falconry family in Ireland, the McCanns. And they had said, "Hey, if you ever get the chance, come on out and visit us." And not 24 hours later, I saw a sale on Delta Sky Miles, 30,000 Delta points, which is extremely inexpensive for traveling from Salt Lake to London round trip in February. And I said, you know what? Screw it. I'm going. And so I bought those tickets, got a substitute for that week, and went out to Ireland and England and met this amazing family, the McCanns, who live in, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, Drogheda, Ireland. And at the time, we went out on the moors and we went out on this beautiful hill fort built by the Celts and flew their birds. It was quite a beautiful experience.
I don't know if you know this or not. I work in healthcare. So, basically, like, I can totally relate to the challenges of trying to find, time off. And the last couple of years or so, I've been doing, contract work. So I try and make sure that I do my best to try and get to where, like, the contracts end. Yeah. And I can have, like, a week or two off to do these little excursions here and there and stuff. But it never... It doesn't always... It's
hard to juggle that schedule when you're so bound to it.
Yeah, it doesn't always fall that way. Mm-hmm. I've been fortunate that it has a lot, but it's kind of like I was telling you earlier, like this trip, for example, since it was only a few days, I was able to pull it off, but, working 5 12-hour night shifts in a row and then coming here for a few days.
It's exhausting.
And then, so I get it. And that's awesome, though, that you've been able to capitalize off of, the connections that you've made and make that work.
Yeah. And thankfully, my administration at my school is super understanding. Our mascot is the hawk. So they capitalize on me where they can, hey, Krista, we need a hawk for this assembly. Can you get one? I'm like, sure, I can get a hawk easily, do some education, talk a little bit about falconry here and there. And so when I tell my administration, hey, I have this opportunity, they're very understanding and very supportive of, yeah, you need to go live your life. But being a teacher, there is a lot of responsibility in knowing that, hey, if I take these days off, I need to make sure that whatever I put in place for my students is going to work for them as well. It's not just about me.
Right.
Yeah.
I know, like, for my schooling experience back in the day, it was like, okay, if this substitute is here, it's going to be
chaos.
It's going to be absolute chaos. Yep. They're going to get eaten alive. Yep. And, it's just, all hell breaks loose on Earth for 45 minutes or whatever. How long the class
absolutely. Yeah. So that's the nice thing about my situation is I have a list of substitutes that I can trust to actually teach and keep the class in line.
Nice.
And my students also, by the time they get to 9th grade, they've kind of figured out the game.
Sure.
They know, okay, this is what Miss Edwards expects, and when she comes back, we need to be able to prove that we've done this. Or if they haven't, they're going to have a lot of homework.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, have you pretty much always lived in the same area, or are you from somewhere else?
Yeah, I grew up in New Jersey.
Okay.
And I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, and then as soon as I turned 18, before I graduated high school, I'd moved to Utah to start summer term at the university I went to. And part of that was because I knew that Utah was known for its good falconry. New Jersey, not so much. They have different styles. And I wasn't able to make any connections there when I was in high school. And I had already made connections in Utah at that point. And so I told my parents, hey, I'm gonna get a falcon, and they said, not under our roof. And I said, okay, I'm moving out. and so I moved to Utah. Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I know some pretty good falconers that came from Jersey. They don't live there anymore.
Exactly.
But,
yeah.
Things, like you said, things have changed a lot, since even then. I mean, even whenever they lived there, it was still very industrial hawking.
Yes.
As opposed, and not really so much in the ways of long wings and things, more your buteos and exhibitors and stuff. But yeah, they don't, they didn't stick around either. So I understand. Yeah.
New Jersey's a great place, but falconry, it's a bit more complicated to make work.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I'm kind of envious. I would move out west again in a heartbeat if I could. I went to audio school for about a year after, to learn how to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
For about a year post high school, like graduated and went out and then ended up back, in Southern Indiana again, and been there ever since. And I would move out west in a heartbeat if I could. But, as they say in the falconry terminology or the falconry sayings, west is best.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I
never looked back.
Yeah.
People ask me, would you go back to New Jersey? And I say, yeah, for about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Then I'm back. And then I'm back to Utah.
Right. So whenever how did your initial discovery of all of this go? Like, whenever you were, how young were you exactly when you found out about all this and decided you wanted to start pursuing it?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. It's kind of a funny story because, every child goes through phases of what they love. Every child, I feel like, has a dinosaur phase, and then every child loves dogs at some point. And so I went through the normal phases. And when I was about 6, I started to go through a bird phase. And so my parents bought me the National Geographic Bird Guide. And I didn't realize you weren't supposed to read it front to back like a normal book. And so in first grade, I started with I think it's the waterfowl that's usually at the front. And I started with the waterfowl, and I started to work my way through this book, reading about, like memorizing the maps and everything. I was not a normal first grader. And then I got to the hawks and the falcons and the eagles, and I was just, pardon the pun, I was enraptured, right? I was immediately like, okay, these are cool birds, ducks, whatever. But these birds, they are amazing. And so at that point, I'd realized, okay, there's something special about this animal. And then I had a bird feeder, and so I started feeding the mourning doves. I started feeding the sparrows. And one day I was out on the front porch reading my little bird book, and sure enough, a red-tailed hawk comes in, kills a mourning dove right in front of me, and sits there and stares at me, and then starts plucking in front of me. And I think the normal first grader reaction would say, oh my gosh, there goes my precious, dove that I was feeding. This is terrible. But for me, I was like, this is so cool. What bird is that? And so I found, oh, it's the red-tailed hawk, and it's right in front of me, and it stayed there for about probably 5 minutes before something finally spooked it. I think it was my mom coming home, and it took off. Thankfully, took the dove with it, so there was just feathers on the ground, and my poor mother was petrified that I'd witnessed such violence, And so at that point, I told my parents, I said, I want a falcon. I want a hawk. I need this in my life. And they said, okay, sure, yeah, well, we'll get you a bird. And so that Christmas, I got a parakeet. And I think in their head, they were thinking, oh, this is another phase. We'll have the parakeet for a few years, And it was not a phase. We often joke about how, do they regret that parakeet? Her name was Icy. She was a great little blue parakeet. I loved her. By the time I got into 3rd grade, I had acquired a cockatiel, who became my very best friend all through grade school and all through middle school. In high school, I got a conure, and so I was steadily moving up in the parrot world. Still not getting a falcon. By high school, I discovered that falconry was a thing, and at that point, I was pretty hooked. I read My Side of the Mountain, like we all do. I swear, 75% of falconers, that's kind of how they get their start.
Believe it or not, I'm in the 25% that still hasn't read it.
Really?
Yeah, believe it or not.
It's a good runaway story to the mountains, and with a falcon. Yeah. But yeah, and so that's how I kind of got my start. So that's what exposed me to falconry. And then by the time I moved out to Utah, I was 18, and I was on, I can't even remember which falconry Facebook group it was, but I had joined quite a few of them at that point. Just kind of lurking and watching and just not making any comments. But somebody about my age posted that they had just gotten their first hawk. And I was like, oh, I rarely see people in their late teens, early 20s as falconers. And so I looked at their profile and I decided to message them. And at that point, I'd realized, oh my gosh, they live 5 miles away from me. So my first message was, you don't know me, but we're going to be best friends. And they responded with, sure, come on over. And me being a naive 19, 20-year-old, I was like, this is a great idea. I'm going to go meet this stranger with a hawk. And went over there and we immediately hit it off. And that's kind of how I got launched into this amazing world.
Nice. Well, and so whenever you initially started off and you kind of started learning with everything, I mean, was your path kind of similar to seemingly 80 to 90% of most falconers that start their apprenticeships? And I mean, did you start off with a red tail? Where did you kind of go a different route?
Yeah, I kind of went a different route. So I passed my falconry test right before I had moved to China. I went to China for about 6 months, but before that I was like, hey, I'm going to take the test. I have a free afternoon. Let's just see what happens. Took the test, passed it miraculously. I was honestly very surprised because I hadn't studied. At that point, I'd just kind of been, again, watching and hanging out and lurking and just observing. But took the test, passed it, and then I went to China. And so I had to put it on pause. But while in China, I had the chance to meet some cormorant fishermen, which isn't falconry necessarily, but it's still using birds to hunt. And that was when I was like, okay, yeah, this is definitely something I really want to do. I can't ever use a cormorant, obviously, but I can use birds of prey. And so when I got back, it was almost like the drive was even stronger because of that experience with the Chinese cormorant fishermen. And so I came back, and I was still in college. I was living in a master bedroom in an apartment that did not allow pets. And so I was like, hey, how am I going to make this work? Because I can't wait another year. I got a sponsor. I started to gather all my equipment, and I talked to my landlord, and I said, hey, just hear me out. I have an idea, and I really need your help with this. And he was like, okay, what do you need? And I said, I need a falcon. It's not a want, it's a need. And he was like, well, tell me about this. Thankfully, he was very open to the idea. And so the way we made it work was I said, it's going to be a passage bird, which means it's wild trapped, which also means I can technically release it if it becomes a problem in the apartment. And he was like, okay, can you show this bird to my kids and do just let us come over and see it. I'm like, yes, that's easy. I can do that. And so we worked out this little deal, right? And the bird was never a problem. I got a kestrel, and I'm sad to say, I really did not know what I was doing that first year, like most falconers. But within a few months, I had realized there's something going on with my body that wasn't going on before the bird. I was coughing. I was having like trouble, not necessarily trouble breathing, but I realized that my energy just wasn't up to where it was before. And so I released the bird, not realizing that these symptoms were connected. Got another kestrel the next year, and about 3 to 4 months in, started having the same thing. It eventually became apparent that I had an allergy to birds, which is the worst curse for any falconer to have. I always say, like, when I die, I have a lot of questions to ask God, and the first one is why? Why me? But I realized, okay, well, I still want to be immersed in this world of falconry. How am I going to do this? And so I had to get creative. I realized I could not keep a kestrel in a rented room, which is what I had been doing. It was fine for the bird, honestly. She had her own desk. She had her own space. It worked out great for her. But I needed, for my health, I needed to have separate spaces. And so my next goal became to buy a house, which is almost impossible for any, 20-something-year-old at the time. And I have my brother to thank for this. He bought a house, and he was bragging to me. And to spite him, I said, you know what? I'm going to buy a house in a few months. And I did. Somehow I realized, oh, wait, actually, if he could buy a house, I could buy a house too. And so I bought a townhouse with 4 bedrooms, and there was plenty of space to keep a bird in a separate room, keep myself separate from the bird. And it's worked out pretty well since I was able to keep everything separated.
That is one hell of an irony.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would suck. I can't even begin to think about, having something, being so passionate about something basically, and then just finding out that you had this allergy. I mean, initially, how did you deal with that? I mean, there
was a lot of crying.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. There was a lot of crying.
I mean, did you try some of the traditional, things as far as antihistamines, all that kind of thing? Or was it finally just one of those things you just kind of realized that there's just not really anything that's ever going to fix this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So at first, I went to probably 3, 4, 5 doctors because they couldn't figure out why I was coughing.
Allergists specifically? Or?
It wasn't until I went to an allergist that we finally got answers.
Oh, so you did the an ENT thing first?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so I went to several different doctors trying to find these answers, and they were doing some research, and I kept on mentioning, I remember saying, could it be possible I have an allergy to birds? And they said, well, I mean, I guess it's not impossible, but also, you had birds growing up and you didn't have problems. I was like, no, I never had problems growing up. It wasn't until recently. And they were like, well, I mean, I guess it's possible, but it's very improbable. Here, try this medication. It will numb your throat so you don't cough. And I'm like, okay, tried that. And it tasted disgusting. It made me cough worse. And then they said, well, I guess it's possible you might have asthma. Let's do asthma tests. That came back negative. They gave me an inhaler anyways to try if I ever had a coughing attack, just see would that open your airways. And, we tried everything. We tried several different pills. We tried all the different, over-the-counter, Allegra, Claritin, all these different things.
Sure.
And nothing really worked. I finally found one that kind of lessened my coughing attacks, but it wasn't necessarily the solution to, oh, finally, I'm cured. Mm-hmm. Until finally I did go to an allergist. I finally told my primary care physician, I was like, I need you to recommend me to an allergist or refer me to an allergist. And he said, okay, go to this one. And they said, what do you want to get tested for? I said, everything. And so I came up positive for your typical mold. Timothy grass was one of them. I don't even know what that looks like. And then I said, well, what about any of the feather tests? And they said, yeah, I mean, you did come up like slightly allergic. It's like an irritant to like poultry feathers, or I think it was feather mix was the name of the shot that they give you, like little prick. Mm-hmm, yeah. And then they're like, but that shouldn't be a problem unless you're around birds. And I was like, that's the problem. I'm around birds. And they were like, oh, like what kind of birds? And I was like, oh, like falcons. And they were like, oh, I know a falconer. That's a lifestyle. I'm like, yeah. And then it became quite an emotional situation of what do I do? Because I want to do this. I've wanted to do this since I was 6, since I discovered the eagle section in that National Geographic book.
Sure. Yeah, no, that whole process sucks. I went through that too. Not, I was violently allergic to cats whenever I was younger.
Oh, no.
The dander, well, not really the dander, but, the saliva that's on the dander,
Yeah.
That whole rigmarole. And so, I ended up doing allergy shots for about 5 years and stuff. So I didn't know if that was a situation where you were able to, eventually do the standard kind of immunology type of course for that, or if it was something that you're just still living with and just dealing with, the best you can today.
Yeah, right now I'm just living with it the best I can. And I think I've found a way to manage it. I'm like, for example, if we had been doing this interview probably, let's say 3 years ago, even 2 years ago, I was coughing at least once every 3 to 5 minutes. And I haven't coughed yet today. So we're doing pretty good.
Nice. Yeah, well, I don't know. Like I said, that's one of those things that, it's tough. But kudos to you for, like I said, still being passionate enough and dedicated enough to be willing to deal with upper airway constriction and or irritation constantly, but to still want to fly these birds and everything. That's a lot that I don't think a lot of people would. I don't know. Granted, the people that we've met throughout our course would probably do something similar if they had to. But
once you get hit by the falconry fever, you can't drop it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, a lot of people would probably just give it up, but then thinking about it, no,
right? No, we would find a way. Yeah,
yeah, because we're that stupid.
Exactly. Yeah. Are we stupid or are we that audacious? I think there's a fine line.
It's a combination of everything.
Yeah.
But, well, so I want to go back to something that you kind of skimmed over just a little bit ago, and the whole China experience.
Yes.
So why did you end up having to go over there for 6 months? Was it a voluntary thing? Was it education? Was it family? Was it?
That's a really good question. Yeah. So it's half family and it's half education.
Okay.
I'm half Chinese. My mother is Chinese. She's American born. But her heritage is Chinese. And I had this opportunity to go teach English in the same region that her family is from. And so I said, you know what? This is an amazing experience. Let's go do it. Let's go see what happens.
Yeah.
A lot happened that I will not delve into here. But one of the most amazing things that happened, and this doesn't really relate to falconry, so excuse me for diverting for a second.
No, it's fine.
But I connected with her family, who was still living in a relatively small village called Shuibu outside of a slightly larger city called Taishan in the Guangdong province. And she had never met them because she was born here. And her mother had passed away when she was 8. And so I met her mother's brother, who was still alive. And it was the most amazing experience of my life. His family just welcomed me. We didn't speak the same language, but they knew exactly who I was. They knew exactly who she was, even though they'd never met her. And that was kind of the catalyst to inspire my mother to also come over and meet her family that she'd never met. So the next year I brought her back. And it was just this beautiful full circle experience where these two families united by blood had never, ever met until my mother's brother was probably in his 90s. And shortly after that, he had passed away. So it was a really beautiful experience.
Sounds like it. Yeah. That's awesome. I'm from, well, I'm not from, but I'm from pretty much where I live, that area in southern Indiana or whatever, but my mom has ancestry in South Korea. So that's something that I hope to get to do something similar to that someday too.
It's
Go to Korea and see. Like I said, I think it would be really neat. But so, I mean, while you were over there then, I mean, you touched on the whole, seeing the, the fishing and everything. Expound on that a little bit, because I've never actually talked to anybody about that. And I've never talked to anybody who's seen firsthand anything like that process. Like, how do they go about doing that?
Oh, it was a super brief experience. I wish it had lasted longer. But basically, I had arrived in this. It's a touristy village, but it's small-ish. It's called Yangshuo, and it's right on the Li River, where you see those beautiful karst mountains. When you see calligraphy paintings of China, they usually illustrate those mountains that just come up out of the river, and that's where the cormorant fishermen are. And I had told my group of other American teachers, I had said, we're going to find cormorant fishermen. And I don't care how long it takes, we're going to do this. And they said, okay, yeah, sure, Krista. They want to do the touristy things. Thankfully, cormorant fishing happens to be one of the kind of touristy things. And so we went on the river, we did this bamboo raft. And as we're on this bamboo raft, I see this gentleman on his raft with about 5 cormorants. And I was losing my mind, for lack of a better term. And I immediately, after I got off my raft at kind of our stop-off point, I ran back up the river and I found him. And I was trying to communicate somehow, that, hey, we have something in common. And so I got him to come over to me, and I showed him a picture of me. At that point, I had held a hawk. So I showed him a picture of me with a hawk. And he immediately was like, oh my gosh, I don't necessarily know what he was saying, but we were gesturing at each other, and we were both kind of making this connection that we both use birds to hunt. And so he just kind of showed me his birds, Unfortunately, I didn't get to necessarily see them fish, but he was just showing me, the tie around the neck and the tie around the legs, and he was showing me his relationship with the birds and how, the birds were still trusted him, and they were in good feather condition. They were very glossy. They were very sleek. They were very mellow. When he put 2 of them on a bamboo rod, and lifted them up on his shoulders, and they balanced perfectly. They weren't baiting, They were just calm, looking around. Even though I don't know cormorants as well as I know, peregrine falcons today, as an example, looking back, those birds were so well manned. They knew the game. And he transferred this bamboo rod, where he was balancing these 2 birds on either side, to my shoulders. And I still have that picture today, where he put his little hat on me, and at the end I offered him money, because it's a touristy thing, but he kind of pushed it away. And it was kind of an emotional moment where I was like, okay, he recognizes that we're kindred spirits, we're both into birds, and we both love these birds so much. And so I was probably just with him for 30, 40 minutes, just where he was showing me the baskets, and he didn't speak any English. And my Mandarin was very shaky at that point. I think I knew how to ask for, the bathroom. I knew how to say I was allergic to spicy things, which, even though I'm not, that's what you say to avoid spicy things. And I knew how to say stop running, because that's what I would say to my Chinese students. But we had a connection, and that was something beautiful.
Like, we've talked about this earlier with some of the other people that have been here at the archives and the rendezvous. It's kind of funny how pretty much no matter what nationality, what kind of falconry is being practiced, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, the foundation is always there, and it never changes.
Yes.
So, like I said, I mean, it's kind of funny you mentioned, the birds being well manned and, the balancing perfectly. It's just, I can't imagine, him doing probably much in anything different, than what we would do. Stuff. But I was just curious because, there's so many different things, and I'm sure you feel the same way. There's so many different things that I haven't got to see in person yet that I would really like to. In all the travels that you've done, is there anything left, like, I don't know, falconry wise, or a specific species on a specific prey that's still kind of like on your
on my radar.
Yeah, on your radar as far as to see?
Oh, there's so much. I mean, with my Chinese and my Asian heritage, I would really, really love to see, how the Kazakh nomads or the Mongolian people practice falconry. I feel like that's on a lot of bucket lists, to see eagle falconry. And one of my dreams is just to stay with a family for a month. Unfortunately, again, with the teacher schedule, you can't do that in the summer. But I would love to see that. I would also really love to see grouse hunting in Scotland. That's definitely one of my dreams. And this next summer, I'm heading over to visit quite a few Scottish falconers who've kindly opened their hearts and their homes to me. And they've invited me back for the grouse season this next year during the fall and winter. So I'm looking forward to doing that, hopefully. And yeah, I would love to see snipe hunting in Ireland. I know that they do a snipe meet. That's something I've been looking forward to seeing. And then I think that there's quite a few just different ways of hawking with long wings that I've never seen.
Yeah.
That I would really like to see. So, I'm familiar with the Utah / the Western American style of hawking with long wings, and I love it. It's a thrill every single time. But I want to see how other people train their long wings and how they've adapted to their specific quarry. For example, I know in the Middle East, it's quite a different style. And so that's something I would really like to see.
Landscape too.
Exactly, yeah. Landscape.
Which, kind of goes hand in hand. But
well, and that's something else I love about all of my experience with so many experienced falconers, not just around the world, but also specific to Utah, is that I can see, how is falconer A doing it differently than falconer B? And then what can I, falconer C, take from both A and B that works for me and my bird specifically?
Yeah. Well, and going back to your specifically going back to your falconry then.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you find your first couple of experiences with kestrels, and how do you think your experience learning was kind of different than a lot of people's than, learning with such a small bird compared to your traditional red tail? And I kind of like getting people's opinions on that too, that started differently. So, I mean, there's people that I know that haven't even ever flown a red tail.
Yes.
And
I've never flown a red tail.
Yeah. So, I mean, now you're another one.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
but I mean, how do you think, do you think that you garnered anything differently from your initial learning experience dealing with that type of species as opposed to, a bigger, hardier raptor? Or
no, that's a good question. I started with a kestrel for practicality. I was living in a student apartment, right? And so obviously a red tail was not going to fit in there. I do know of one falconer who somehow managed to sneak a red tail into their dorm, and they did that for I can't remember how long, but they managed it. I knew I could not. And so I got my first kestrel. Her name was Sakara, which everybody starts with these really fun names. And then by the end, you're like, oh, this is Julie, the whatever,
Yeah.
And so anyways, I did really learn a lot from her in terms of just manning and, of course, the weight management. It's so specific for kestrels. I remember one of my, not my actual sponsor, but somebody I was talking to at the time had said, you need to get this within 0.5 of a gram accuracy. And I was like, okay, we're going to do it. And we did it. She was coming to me very reliably on the creance. She was coming to the glove, to the lure. And I somehow was not just able to make that step from the lure to free flying. I think a lot of that had to do with my own insecurities. I think a lot of apprentices are extremely insecure. I was no different. And so Sakara's season did not end with free flying. And I ended up releasing her. The next kestrel I got, oh my gosh, she was interesting. She screamed with the hood on, she screamed with the hood off, and I realized, okay, this bird's not meant for falconry. And so I released her, and I got a new bird. And so I kind of did the same thing with that bird. However, I finally did get that bird free flying. After about a month, I was like, okay, I have telemetry, I have a little micro transmitter, we're going to do this thing. And I free flew her for the first time, just easy flight. From her perch to me about 10 feet, and I was shaking the entire time. But she did it, and I was like, okay, we can overcome this. And so then I started trying to field hawk her, because I I was so shy. I hadn't reached out to people. I was so nervous to reach out to anybody. And I didn't know necessarily how to get her car hawking. I'm very much a person that needs to be kind of guided along the way, which I think makes me also a good teacher because I recognize students that need that as well. And I couldn't quite learn from watching videos or reading a book. I needed a little bit more hands-on. And there's all different types of learning styles. I don't think there's anything wrong with one or the other, but I needed more help. And so anyways, I tried field hawking her. It didn't quite work out. We'd never caught anything. But I do remember one day she took off and I was just devastated. I took out my telemetry. I was tracking her and I was just trying to figure out, okay, where's this bird going? And then I realized she came right back to the field where we started and she was waiting for me. And that was kind of the moment where it clicked. And I was like, oh, I'm actually doing something right. She's not catching anything, but she came back to where we started. So I'm doing something right. From there, that was about the time that I figured out, okay, I have this allergy. And so I was like, okay, falconry is not working for me right now. I need to take a break for my own health. And so I acquired a camera. And I realized this is how I'm going to start to get in with other falconers. Because who isn't going to love getting pictures of themselves in the field with their bird? It's hard to hire a photographer to do that, but what if somebody is saying, hey, I want to come out, I want to learn from you, and I want to photograph? And so I have this amazing friend. Her name is Lydia Ripplinger, and she's a wildlife photographer. And she and I figured out, okay, let's get this camera. This is within your budget. And that's kind of how I was fortunate enough to meet all these amazing Utah falconers. And they've been so kind and so welcoming and so generous. I never needed the camera to begin with. I could have just reached out and said, hey, can I please experience this with you? I know that you do this really well. I want to see it in person. And they would have said yes, but it was my own insecurities holding me back.
It's admirable, though, that you were wanting to give something back.
Yes.
You weren't just expecting, to get something, an experience for nothing. Like it's nice though that you wanted to kind of approach it with the attitude of I want to have something to offer these people for their time.
Absolutely.
And not everybody thinks like that.
Yeah.
So that's admirable.
Thank you. Yeah. I try to make sure that people know that I'm not trying to use them, for lack of a better term, but that I really do want to invest in a friendship, and a relationship as well.
Sure.
And so I think it's a mutually beneficial situation where, hey, now we have these amazing photos to remember this particular bird,
Sure. Yeah. No, I totally get it. It's, like I said, there's a lot to be said for that. You're going to get a lot further ahead as you have, obviously, because you've been around the world and have gotten a lot of really cool opportunities. And so what are you, what are you doing now? Like, what are you flying now? Like, what's present day look like for you?
Oh gosh, I love present day falconer Krista, because I know that if 12-year-old non-falconer Krista could see her, she would think, oh my gosh, this girl's amazing. This girl's so cool. And I try to come back to that at least once every few weeks when I'm feeling down on myself. I think, you know what? 29-year-old Krista's doing really good, because 12-year-old Krista would look at her and say, she's amazing. So 29-year-old Krista now has a peregrine falcon, a female named Sky. She's my second peregrine. And before I talk about Sky, I want to talk about Comet, who is my tiercel peregrine. And I started with him this season. And Comet came from this amazing falconer named Mark Housekeeper. And I just want to talk about Mark for a second, if that's okay.
Sure, of course. It's a good story.
Yeah. Mark is amazing. And I'm going to try not to cry. I've already cried about him once today. But Mark came into my life in January of, I believe it was 2022. So about a year and a half ago-ish. And he messaged me, and I'd known him. We'd met before at different events and barbecues and whatnot, but I didn't really get to know him until then. So he messaged me because I'd been doing my photography. And he said, hey, Krista, I have a favor to ask of you. Can you come out and photograph me and my family with our peregrine falcon, Comet? And I said, yeah, of course, like, I'm happy to. When do you want to do this? And he said, sooner rather than later. I actually have a diagnosis. I have ALS, which is also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. And a lot of people are familiar with this terrible disease. But for those of you that don't know, basically, your muscles and your joints just kind of stop working. And he had started what he called adaptive falconry. And he said, I really want documentation of this experience with my family and myself, because I think I want to write an article about my experiences with ALS and continuing to be a falconer. Because as so many of us know, falconry we do until we die, until the very end. And Mark was no different. When he got the diagnosis, he and his family got together and discussed, could we possibly continue doing falconry? Because that is one of the most core characteristics of Mark, as it is for a lot of us. And the family came together and said, yes, we can make this work. And so I went out in the field for the first time with him and photographed his daughter, Sarah, and him working together as a team to make this thing happen for him. And so, for example, adaptive falconry, he had this motorized wheelchair that went over all kinds of terrain. And he couldn't at this point walk. So he needed this wheelchair to get from place to place. But he realized that with his wheelchair, he couldn't swing a normal lure because it just wasn't really conducive. And so he used a lure pole instead. Easy fix, right? He realized that the grip in his fingers wasn't working the way it should. And so he was struggling with certain clips and trying to weave, the swivel through the jesses to secure his bird. And so he realized, okay, with a French clip, I can still hold it between my hand and the fingers that are still working to open and close it. He lost control of his voice. And so he got an electronic whistle that he could use instead to cue the bird. And so all these things kind of came together, and he wanted to talk about, hey, I can still do falconry to the best of my abilities, and there's ways to make this work. And I really, really admired that in him. And so I kept on going out with him, not at this point because of the photos, but because I just wanted to be around him. He had such an infectious joy, and he was such a great presence to be around. And there was so much falconry knowledge in this man, and I just couldn't let it go. And so I kept on going out with him, and soon enough, his family was inviting me over for dinner. And I really did feel like I became a part of the family, and I feel like I gained a sister in both Natasha and Sarah, his two lovely daughters. And his amazing wife, Shimei, has just been so kind and caring, and has kind of become a bit of a mother to me as well. And so towards the end, Mark needed to figure out, what am I going to do with Comet, his peregrine? And he was originally going to give Comet to his mentor, to his sponsor, from years and years and years ago. But then he approached me and he said, Krista, would you like Comet? And I was scared because I hadn't had a falconry bird. I had those kestrels about 5 years ago. I had seen and experienced falconry with Robert Bagley and with Steve Shingren, with Steve Tate, Harold Clark, some of these most amazing falconers. I still hadn't had a bird at that point because I still felt like I was still learning. How can I be worthy of such an amazing animal, And I kind of waffled on the decision a bit. And he said, there's no pressure, but I would really like you to have Comet. And I think that you will do well with him. And I said, okay, let's do this. Let's see what I can do. And so I took Comet. I had him through the molt. He molted out beautifully. And then we started the next season together. And I had one goal in mind, and this is where it gets kind of sad. I wanted to keep Comet alive. And obviously we all do, right? We all want to keep our birds alive, but I said, okay, Comet, you need to stay alive. Because I cannot bear the idea of telling Mark that you were no longer here on this earth. And Comet was unfortunately taken by a golden eagle. And we found his remains. We knew it was him when we tracked the GPS to that spot. And I called his daughter, Sarah, and I said, something terrible happened, I did my best. I tried to protect him, but I couldn't. When they're so high in the sky, you can't protect them.
Yeah.
And Sarah immediately said, "We don't blame you at all. Let me tell Mark." And I met Sarah later at my house, probably 30 minutes later, with Comet's feathers that were left. And she said, "Krista, the most amazing thing was I went to go tell Mark, and I was obviously crying. And Mark immediately knew what happened. He typed out, because at this point he couldn't speak. And so he had a little device that he could type out with his eyes, because he also couldn't use his hands. And he typed out Comet, ? And Sarah nodded and said yes. And then Mark said Eagle, ? And Sarah said, "How did you know?" Because Sarah knew that I hadn't told anybody yet. And he typed out, "I've had a feeling since about, since last afternoon or last evening," which was around the time I lost Comet. And so it was just amazing to me that he had this connection with this bird. And he immediately texted me. And the first thing he said was, "I'm going to let you be sad today, but tomorrow it's time for you to get a new bird, or to at least start thinking about a new bird." And that's kind of the mentality I've adopted with a lot of things in my life. It's okay to be sad today, but tomorrow is the time to start to think about a new bird. And so now I have Sky, who has been just a joy and a pleasure to work with.
Cool. Yeah, I kind of adopted something. I kind of reached I can't remember what age I was, but there was a point where I'm like, I can't dwell on stuff. And and I know for me, what I called it, for my personal, I don't know, titling, I guess.
Yeah.
I called it my 24-hour pity party.
Yes.
And I was like, I'm giving myself a day.
Yes.
And after that, time to move on.
We got to move on.
Yeah.
Yep.
And ironically enough, also, that's kind of bled into, our hunting group and stuff too. Even if you have something that's really fun to celebrate and stuff, they give you 24 hours. You can't gloat about it anymore. And then you got to move on.
Well, that's a good attitude to have too, right? Yeah, I like that. We can't gloat too much over our wins, but it's a healthy mindset, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also just us being asses to each other too, to a certain extent. But,
yeah.
But you know how it goes. But, so how's, the current bird then? Have you gotten a chance to, hunt much with your schedule and everything else that you've been doing?
Yeah.
How was this your first season with that bird then?
This is my first season with Comet. Okay. Yeah. And then in January, I got Sky.
Sky. Yeah.
Sky.
Yeah. So, have you gotten a chance? I know that wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
Were you able to still do much since you kind of got Sky late in the season? Or
yeah, we were able to accomplish so much together. And I have to say, I feel like a lot of the accomplishments were more me feeling like I was accomplished, because now I'm finally doing this thing called falconry. I've been waiting for 7 years to do. I've had my license for so long. In fact, I'm the vice president of the Utah Falconers Association, and I somehow was serving as the vice president without ever actually having flown a bird at that point. But I really enjoyed, I've really enjoyed serving as vice president. It's been a lot of fun, and I've met a lot of people through that. But anyways, going back to Sky. So Sky was formerly Harold Clark's bird, who was bred by Joe Terry. And after Comet passed away, Harold, my mentor, said, "Hey, Sky would be perfect for you. And I really think you should consider taking Sky." And I was distraught. I was just, maybe in a year, I can think about another bird. But Mark's words came back to me, and he said, "It's time to get another bird." And I was like, okay. After my winter break, because as a teacher, we get a long winter break, I went home to New Jersey, and then I came back, and Harold transferred Sky to me. And Sky is a 2-year-old female peregrine, and she is kind of funny. Harold kind of calls her a Velcro bird. I like to joke that she has separation anxiety. She's very loyal. Whenever I watch the GPS readings, she stays really tight on top of you. She's just doing these really tight circles. And she was probably hitting, and I know a lot of long-wingers are going to kind of scoff at this, but she was hitting like 250-ish, when I got her. And I entered her in the Utah Sky Trials, which the minimum pitch is 300. And I wanted to hit that 300. So I got her January 4th, and then the Sky Trials were February 4th. And so I said, we're going to hit it every single day. We're going to go out there. We're going to train as often as we can. Now, the nice thing about being a teacher is even though there's a lot of inconveniences, we do finish teaching by about 3. Mm-hmm. So there's still 2-ish hours of sunlight. Mm-hmm. So I would beeline it out there to one of my flying fields. The closest one was 45 minutes away from my school, an hour and 15 minutes away from my house. And so about 3 to 4, maybe 5 times a week, we would go out there and we would just start training. We were doing pigeons at the time because with HPAI, I was just nervous. Mm-hmm. I'd already lost a bird. I did not want to risk losing another bird.
Yeah.
And so we stuck with the safe stuff, especially since we were training for Sky Trials. Pigeons are what we were doing. Mm-hmm. And so she was still hitting, she always went above 250. It was always iffy if she was going to hit 300 or higher. And so we went out there, and the day before, or the 2 days, because I didn't want to fly her the day before the Sky Trials, but 2 days before the Sky Trials, 2 things happened. I got my SUV stuck in the snow, and I was with Harold, and we looked at it, and we were like, okay, well, we could try to figure out now, or we could fly the birds. Let's fly the birds. And Harold has Buddy, who is Sky's older brother from another clutch. And Buddy is an amazing bird. He went on to win the Sky Trials this year. And that day, I think he hit 1,300 feet. And we were like, okay, one of our birds is doing amazing. Let's fly Sky. And so we flew Sky, and that day she hit 360 feet. And I was through the roof. I was like, okay, we got this. We're going to do it. We're going to be amazing. We're going to enter the Sky Trials, and we're going to kill it. And sure enough, first we got my car unstuck, which was great. And then on the day of the Sky Trials, I remember just praying and just hoping to high heavens that she would hit that 300 mark. Because if she didn't, then she couldn't get served pigeons and we'd get disqualified, which was still fine, because at least I faced my fears, my insecurities about performing in front of a large, group of people and falconers especially. But I knew I had so many people that supported me out there. They wanted to see me succeed. And it was such an honor. But we went out there and I remember, somebody saying like, whoa, Krista has an entourage. It was such a beautiful, great moment that so many people wanted to see me succeed. They all wanted to be out in the field with me. And so I went out with Sky, and I remember turning back to my quote unquote entourage and saying, okay, everybody who's not Harold, stay right here. Everybody who is Harold, come with me. Because I really needed Harold's support at that time. And Steve Shingren, of course, was there. David Skinner was there. And it was really quite special. But so we go out there and I take Sky's hood off and she starts to sun herself. And I'm like, oh girl, no, not now. Now is not the time to sun. But after about 3 minutes, she takes off and she starts pumping, and the adrenaline in me was just like, okay, we're doing this. We're going to get this done, and we're going to go 300 feet. And I turn to the pigeon person. I can't remember their name, but I turn to the pigeon person and I say, when she hits that 300 feet, throw those pigeons, because I just wanted to get served pigeons. And so as usual, Sky's starting to pump her wings. She kind of goes out towards the crowd, looks at the crowd, comes back around, is doing these super tight circles above me. I'm kind of walking around in the field, trying to kind of simulate what we normally do, just this time with 100 people watching. And I can see that she's still pumping her wings. She's going up, and I'm looking at my GPS, and I'm checking with the guy, with the judge that has the other GPS on. And I'm just saying, hey, do you have 260? Yeah, you have 260. Okay, I've got 280. Are you at 280? Yeah, you're at 280. Okay, I'm at 290, 295, 299, 301. And I say, throw the pigeons. And Harold says, no, not yet. She's still going up. And I think finally we threw the pigeons. I think she was at 325. So not remarkably above 300, not the 365 she did before. But I was thrilled. She stooped, she chased, she turned the pigeon several times, and we ended up placing 6th place out of, I think, 12 birds were entered. So we were right at that halfway mark, and I was thrilled. I was through the roof. I rode that high for probably a month, and I'm still posting things about it on my Instagram because it's such a great moment for me. And I, if my research is correct, I think I'm actually the first woman to enter the Utah Sky Trials, which made it extra special. It's
been going on a long time.
It has been, 48 years.
Wow, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, congratulations on hitting a goal.
Thank you.
And, you know, reaching a personal milestone. It's always great to hit those. And yeah, I mean, especially after dealing with a lot of adversity, especially over the course of a season and dealing with that kind of loss. And, well, technically, you know, more than one
More
loss.
than just Comet, yeah.
For sure.
Mark passed away as well.
Exactly. So, I mean, congratulations to you for at least finishing on a high note for yourself, you know. And
Thank you.
It's yeah, I mean, as they say, highest to highs, lowest to lows.
It is,
and, you know, and there and back again. So, well, great. You know, I mean, it's been great getting a chance to sit down, get to know you a little bit. And before we end this, I've been asking people kind of what they would like to pass on as far as a little bit of wisdom, advice, anything to future generations or even current Falconers, or, I mean, what do you think would be something that you would like to pass on that would be, I don't know, helpful to people?
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much, right? Like, how do I choose just one little quote ism, you know, to share with people? But I think perhaps the thing that helped me the most was networking and just gaining friends and just not being shy. I was super shy, as I mentioned earlier, right? I was super insecure. But Falconers as a whole are very kind people, and we want to share our knowledge and our craft with people who are genuinely passionate and genuinely invested. And we want to see that our knowledge isn't going to go to waste, right? We want to see that our investment is going to turn out a new generation of Falconers. And so I think I would I think my best advice would be just keep hounding people, right? Like you need to put yourself out there because people aren't going to come looking for you. You need to go looking for people to help further yourself in this amazing art. And I would also just recommend people to be genuine, authentic, because as we know, the birds respond well to people who are authentic. And I think people are the same way.
Yeah, and I think we as Falconers especially can usually see pretty quick when someone isn't really, you know.
Oh, absolutely. We can tell.
Yeah. When they're kind of talking the talk but not walking the walk, so to speak. Yeah. So awesome. Well, I think that's a good note to end things on, and we can get out of this hot sauna of a room and go mingle some more and chat a little more, have a beer, and then go our separate ways, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's been a great rendezvous. This has been fun.
Yeah. This is my first time at this. So,
me too.
Yeah, great time. And like I said, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.